Hi there, this is Phil with PhilFX and another tutorial here. This one is going to be on just getting started, the beginning of working with character animation. And we're not going to cover a whole lot today. This is really just to get my students started in class. And I'm going to cover some of the basics of how animation is built up relative to creating rigs, and then I'm going to demonstrate one of the rigs I want you to be using in class, and start initially what the first homework assignment will be, so you can see and get a good idea of what you need to do and you're prepared for that. So let's go ahead and get started. So in animation, when you're working with rigs, most of the people in my class have taken the basic After Effects class, and we've done two-dimensional animation. And in 2D animation, the concept of creating a rig where you use parenting and create a hierarchy should not be unfamiliar, and that we use a hierarchy to create a rig. So when we move the shoulder, let's say, of an arm, the lower arm and the hand all move with it. And you have the same kind of constructs within Maya and within most 3D programs, although it gets a lot more sophisticated, obviously, because you're dealing with three-dimensional objects now, not two-dimensional objects. So what I wanted to show real quick in how some of this works is, let's just start with a quick object here. So I'm going to create a polycylinder, and let's make that 0.5, make the height 10. And I want two subdivisions in there, and let's raise that up a little bit. So we've got ourselves this polycylinder, and I have it not shaded. I'm not showing it shaded at the moment like that. I've got looking at it in wireframe mode so we can see inside. And let's just suppose that this is a leg. So we've got the upper part of the thigh. Right here is the knee, and right down here would be the ankle. And so we've constructed this shell. And as you know, when you're modeling with Maya, you're really only making shells, all right? There's nothing inside here. There's no characteristics relative to the inside of this volume and nothing to the outside. You really just have this shell, the surfaces that make up this object, and that's all you've modeled, all right? So we want to be able to take and bend, shim, and mutilate this thing and animate it just like you might do with a leg. And there are tools that are built within Maya, as there are with many other 3D programs, that allow you to do this fairly simple. So one of the first things you want to do is, we'll go up here and we need to rig this. So you go to your menu selection, and we want the rigging selection, and I'm going to go over here to my shelf and get my rigging shelf. And let's pop over here, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some bones, essentially. And so we're going to create some joints. And so I go over here and click, and I'm going to create a joint right there, come down to here, come down to there. And so we have this displayed, and I've created these joints, and you can see the way that Maya creates these, it makes things hierarchical. And so it creates these joints for me. Excuse me there. I needed to do a cough, and I certainly didn't want to do that into the microphone. So I was saying we have these joints here, and let's look at that real quick. So let me just hide that outside shell. And you can see these joints that we have, that we've created. And you can let's see, what has that done? Oh, that's created something else. Undo that. All right, I didn't want to do that. All right, so we've got that done. 6, hit return. Okay, so I have this joint here. Let me grab that top one, and you can see that it follows what you would expect with a hierarchy. Okay, I can go in and I can rotate this. I can translate it, and things move in a hierarchy as you would expect with a translation. And depending upon your setup, the scale and how you see this thing how you see the joints may be different. You can change that if you go into Windows Setting and Preferences, and you go to your animation preferences, and we go here to kinematics, and I can go in and change the size of my joints, so you can see what that's doing. All right, so I can go in and change the size on those joints simply by it's a global parameter, so I can go in there and do that. I think I had this set around 0.6, which is fine for what I'm wanting to do. And so I have these joints, and what you'd like to be able to do is these joints are what we end up binding to this outside cylinder, which if this was a character, that would be the skin. So the way that we do that is I go in here and I grab the entire tree, and I shift select. So you select the joints first, and you start at the top of the hierarchy, and I shift select the shell, in this case the cylinder that I want to be able to bind things to, and I go up to my menu here and I say skin, and I say bind skin. And what that does is it has now bound this skeleton of these joints to this skin. So if I go in and I do some rotation, lo and behold, it bends the skin and it deforms it. And the way that it deforms it, I don't want to get into this in this particular lecture, but when you do the binding, there's things called weights, and there's a weighting. And depending upon how your weights are set, it creates a set of rules that Maya uses to figure out how it's going to bend the outside shell. If I went down here to this joint 6 and I rotated it, you can see that it's even bending the bottom. Okay, so it has bound itself to this bottom surface, this bottom joint, and this joint has bound itself to what would be probably considered the knee. And we can do translations, and in doing so we end up doing deformations on the outside skin. So this is exactly what you want to be able to do when you're trying to animate a character. And this allows us to go in and animate this character by creating essentially a series of joints, putting them together, and then binding them to the skin. The last thing that you'd end up doing then is you create these control surfaces that allow you to control things, and probably the best way to do that is let's go ahead and let's look at a basic rig. So I have my project already set, and I'm using a pre-built rig, and these are free, and anyone can download these. This particular one is called Max, and I'm not going to save this. Let's open up Max here. And so here's Max, and Max is a character, and someone has nicely built this entire rig. Honestly, if I wanted to teach rigging, we probably could take an entire semester just to cover that whole subject. There's so many things that go into just creating what is considered to be a good rig. If you're interested in learning rigging, I'm not going to have any classes on that because that's not my particular expertise, and I don't feel essentially qualified for teaching rigging, but there are plenty of classes on Lynda and Pluralsight, as well as Gnomon School. Norman Workshop have some classes you may be interested in. If you're interested in just doing character animation, this is where I got that rig. There's a very neat source called the 11 Second Club, and they have competitions all the time, and you can get a rig. If we go to the home page here, and the 11 Second Club, they have contests, and so you can go in and you can participate, and they've got quite a few people that compete all the time. And if we go to the resources tab here, this is where I picked up the particular rigs that we're going to be using in class. So there's a fairly sophisticated rig called 11, and I've distributed that one on the server so you can look at it. It needed a few corrections to work with Maya 2017. But we'll be using that one later. That's a fairly complicated rig, and I really don't want to get started with something quite that deep. There's some other rigs here. There's one called Norman, and there's another one called Morpheus. Another simple one that we probably will use in class is called Moon, and this is Max. This is the one that I'm displaying right now, and Max is a very nice, fairly simple rig. If you're interested, there's tons of resources, again, on the web. If you go to High-End 3D, and you can see my link here. If you go to Character Rigs and Downloads, there are a plethora, okay, one of 25 of 396 rigs. So on High-End 3D, there are lots and lots of rigs that are available. Some of these you pay for, most of them are free, and you can see somebody's already put BB-8 up there for Maya, and you can animate with BB-8. We've got some quadrupeds. There's a zebra there. Another resource is a website called Animation Buffet, and again you can see the URL up here, and they've got some nice rigs in there, and they have also some workshops and things like that if you're interested in just doing animation. So that's where I got the rig from. So let's take a look at Max here and see how he works. So Max is set up, and you can see these loops, and Max is a little bit different from some of the rigs I've seen and worked with in the past, in that to move the entire rig, you essentially select the whole thing and hit the W, and I can move it. Usually in rigs there's a control shape that you would select to select the entire rig. Max doesn't seem to have that, or if he does, I'm not aware of it. But let's go in and we'll break this down just a little bit. What you're seeing is you see these different loops here, and these are the loops that allow you to control the rig. Makes it much simpler than trying to go in and grab bones, because you're not, as an animator, you don't want to be grabbing joints. You want to grab something that allows you to do the animation. So the rigger has created these control loops, and you can see this one right here, and I selected it, and we can see we can do translations and rotations. He's allowing some stretching. Not all rigs will allow stretching, but I can go in here and do a Fantastic Four kind of stretch on his arm, so though I can do some unrealistic movements in that. Sometimes some rigs won't have that. They won't allow you to stretch it, or it'll take some kind of a special control switch that should be explained in the rig that allows you to do that. But you can see we've got a hierarchy here, and so I've grabbed the top of this control ring, and if I go in here and hit E and do a rotation, you can see we take the whole arm with that. I can go in here and select just this one, and so he hasn't got, so I can go in and I can move his arm like that, and then I can grab this one and I can move the hand down. So you can see I've gone right down there. And this is called forward kinematics, all right? Forward kinematics are when you animate and you work from the top of the hierarchy and you go down the tree, which is just what I did. So this is considered to be forward kinematic, or FK animation. And with FK animation, you work yourself right down the tree. He also has some controls here on the finger, so I can select this finger. And they've got a nice control here, so I select rotate Z, and if I get in here and push my middle mouse button and drag, you can see I can curl that entire finger. That makes it really nice. So if you want to go in and you want to clench a fist, let's say, you can see that you can go in, and one at a time I can grab each of these fingers and grab this, and I can close that. Grab that one, close that, and grab that finger, and we can close that. All right, so you've got a nice way of closing the hand and animating all those fingers and get that detail working there. So you can see that by grabbing these controls and we could set keyframes. I could have set keyframes in all this that I did, that this essentially is how you do the animation. So let me go through, undo all this and get him back to where he was. And so I've demonstrated FK, or forward kinematic animation. Let's go in and look at the legs, because the legs are set up for what's called IK, or inverse kinematics. So in inverse kinematics, I go in, and if I grab this leg, I can take this and notice what that does. All right, so as I pick up the foot, it's automatically adjusting the knee and placing that where that needs to be. All right, and so that's called inverse kinematics. And by picking that up, I am forcing essentially backwards down the path of how we work this. Now, if this character is going to be walking, I first started with the translation. I could hit my E and do a rotation on the foot and kind of bring that down. And so if I wanted to look at placing this foot, because we're going to do a walk cycle, which we're going to demonstrate here pretty quick, then this is fairly simple to do. And you can see all I'm doing is translations and rotations. And so making this to animate is really, really quite simple. I don't have to deal with joints. I have these nice control surfaces that are built in. And by working with these control surfaces, I can perform all the animation that I need. And I can position the legs and arms and feet and everything the way that I want. And as an animator, this is exactly what you do. So one of the next things you want to do is, before you get into animating and animating that character, set this down, is you want to make sure of your animation settings. And you can do that by going up to Windows and Preferences, but actually there's a little hot button that Maya had built in. You go right down to this corner and click on this. It automatically calls up Animation Preferences, and we can see where we're at on our time slider. And the default is, at the moment, it's set for 25 frames per second. I think that's probably what this rig was set up. Most animations we'll be doing in class, so I want you to do 24 frames a second. And so we'll use 24 frames a second. And you definitely want to be playing every frame when you're doing animation. Once you're all done, if you want to see how your animation plays out in real time, you can change this. All right. But for right now, you want to be able to play every frame, and that's important for you when you're seeing that. So we're at 24 frames a second, and you want to see playback where you play on every frame. So we'll just hit save on that and go through here. And real quick, before I move on, let's take a look at the face here. And you can see some of the controls that the rigger has put into the face for animation. And these are, I've seen these kind of controls before. This is an interesting way of doing it. So I can go in here and I can click on the jaw, and I click on that control, and if I move this open, you can see I can take and I can swing left and right and go up and down, and in just doing that through translations, I can move the jaw and move how it looks. And you can see right here, this is what's being animated. So what I'd want to do is set keyframes on this, and then I'd go in and I'd move my jaw the way that I want to. And we would keyframe that through. You have different kind of controls here where I can take the lips. Let's see, what is this? Okay, you can see that I can kind of slide the mouth back and forth. I can pinch the cheeks in and stretch them out. So I have a fair amount of control on how that appears. We can go in and we look at the eyes. We actually have some controls here, so I can go in there and I can make the eye look really big, make the eye really small. So just through a couple of simple controls, we can go in here and there's a lot of animation that we can do. You can see I can blink you've got controls over the lower eyelid as well as controls over the upper eyelid. So I can control that down so you can make the character blink, quite simple. And again, same kind of thing. So we can go in and here's a control for the head. So I can take that head and we can rotate it and note that everything goes with it, including the controls, which is kind of nice. And so as you work this around, you can see how you can and do facial expressions and animate on the face. So again, Max I think is perfect for just getting started. He's a very simple rig. Rigs can be quite complicated. I'll open one up that's far more complicated than this just to show you the difference in those two. But let's look at Max and look at how we might want to animate a walk cycle. So if you've taken my Art 184 class and you've worked through creating a walk cycle in After Effects, you've seen my classic walk cycle where we go through the contact, recoil, passing, and high point. And so at the contact phase, you have a left and a right leg, and we get them positioned pretty much to look like that. And that's the position you'd want for frame 1. And this is the positions you'd want for frame 5. And frame 9, frame 13, then going back, frame 17 would look like this, except your legs would be switched, okay? So the darker leg that's here would be back where the lighter leg is, and the lighter leg would be forward where the darker leg is. And you work this through again. And that takes you through, if you just keyframe these particular positions on these keyframes that I've laid out right here, on these frames that I've laid out right here, you'll have a basic walk cycle. So let's go ahead and we'll set up a couple of these. And I don't want to necessarily work from I could work from just a profile, but that's kind of difficult because you can't really see things. I much prefer to animate and look at it from the perspective camera, and I just need to pay some close attention to how I pick things. So if we go back in and we look at this, we can see, okay, initially I want one leg back and one leg forward. Let's call the dark leg the right leg, which is this leg right here. And so what I want to be able to do in keyframe 1 is I'm going to create a starting position, and I want to take and probably translate this out. So we're going to move this out, and I'm going to take that there. And you really wouldn't walk with your legs quite locked like that. That looks very unnatural. So let's take this and we're going to move this up just a little bit. So there's just a little bit of a kink in the leg. All right, that looks a little better. And maybe take this and I'll rotate that down just a little bit. And that looks pretty good like that. Okay, so we have that step there. And so then let's go to the other leg. And I want to push that back just a little bit. E, W, bring that up just a little. Get a little bit of a kink there. And that looks pretty good. So you want to set an initial keyframe for both positions, right? So this is our time 0, or frame 1 rather. And so what I want to do is I want to set keyframes. Well, if you've worked animation before, you probably know that I can go in here and I've got my time set, so I could just go hit the S key. And if I hit the S key, you can see over here it keyframed everything. That's probably not what you want to do, because you end up generating lots of keyframes on things that you may or may not need to keyframe at all. And while it's not technically incorrect, it just creates a lot more information that you probably want to deal with as an animator. So I don't recommend doing that. So what you want to do is select these. Essentially all we're working with is translation and rotation at the moment. So I'm going to select translate and rotate on all those items for the left foot. And we right click on here and we say key selected. So I'm going to select those, and I'm going to go over here. Same kind of thing. I have just translation and rotation, and I'm going to key the selected there. All right. So now what I want to do is, we said, okay, so that's our start. So we go to frame 5 and we want to change those positions. But before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one thing right here, and this is I'm going to activate auto keyframing. So if I toggle that, then all I need to do is I've already set what I want keyframed. So I want translation and rotation set on this control surface, and I want translation and rotation keyframed on that control surface. And if I go in and I say auto keyframe, it's as soon as I change any of these values at any specific time, Maya is going to automatically make keyframes for me, which is exactly what I want. So I'm going to go out here and I'm going to go to frame 5. And if we look in frame 5, what's happened? Let's see, that left foot is going to go much higher. So I'm going to take this one that I have selected, and I want him to come up more. And we want to rotate that probably a little bit more like that. Come even more, come even higher than that still. And rotate like that. Let's see, how does that look relative to what I'm saying? That looks about right. Okay. And then I want to take this, my right leg, and I want that to come back. This is where inverse kinematics can sometimes be a problem, because it would be easier to grab this just at the hip, but I can't. I have to actually grab it at the placement of the foot. So I go in and I rotate this down, come forward a little bit, maybe come down like that, rotate this back up. And if we look at that, that looks about what I'm looking for, okay? And so then if we go to frame 9, all right, we're going to go into the passing, all right? So in the passing, that left leg is starting to pass through. That's exactly what passing is all about. So we want to go to keyframe 9. I'll grab this left one, and I'm going to push him forward through. Probably bring him up just a little bit, and you're going to start bringing that toe in because you're going to be ready to making a step. So he's like that. All right, and then this right leg, we're going to bring him back just a little bit. Maybe bring him up just a little more, back a little bit. Put a little bit of angle on there. Okay. And then let's get to the last one. That's the last one I'm going to do. So we get to the high point. So the high point's at frame 13. So I come out here to frame 13. And I take this foot. And I'm going to bring him all the way through. And we have high point. And what's the bottom of that foot doing? Right, the bottom of that foot comes forward just a little bit. All right. And the right leg has moved back significantly. So we move this back significantly, we come up. Take this, come down just a little bit. Here's where if I had a rig and my character was built with an articulation in the toes, I probably would use that, okay? And right down here, I would probably bend the toes just a little bit. This particular rig does not have that, so it's not been built into the character. And so at the moment, I really just have a flat foot. And for what we're doing, that's fine. So I've created, because I've used auto keyframing, I've created 1/2 of my walk cycle. And you can see really quick, we've got a nice walk cycle, at least the start of a nice walk cycle, where we have the left leg back and we bring it forward and we're getting ready to put the left leg down, and then we would repeat this to make a walk cycle. And if then we were doing an animation, a simple way to do an animation is, you notice I haven't translated my character in X at all. Okay, I'm just working with an in-place walk cycle, and we'll not discuss it today, but using the graph editor we can grab a section of keyframes and we can essentially loop on those keyframes with Maya. And so we can by creating that loop, we can accomplish what we did in After Effects by placing a composition inside of another composition and looping that composition. We will loop this animation around the complete walk cycle, and then you provide a forward animation translation of the entire character. And if we had a set here, it would give the visual appearance that our character is walking across the stage. And as long as you timed it correctly and sequenced things properly, that would work out quite well. So that's essentially what I want for my 245 students to do for the first assignment, is let's create a complete walk cycle. And I just did one quarter of that, which is the legs. I want you to go ahead and animate the arms also. Those will animate a little bit different because those are forward kinematics, not inverse kinematics as the legs are. And but let's see some animation where you animate both the hands, or the arms rather, and the legs, and we'll get a full walk cycle in there. I said I was going to show a more complicated rig. Let me do that real quick. So if I set project and I go over here to the 11 rig and set that, and let's open up that 11 rig. And I'm not going to save my animations here. But with the 11 rig, you can see this is a lot more complicated. There's a lot more controls, especially on the face, the way that it's put together. This rig actually can be modified, so you can make this rig a male or a female. If anyone that's out there watching, if you happen to go to that 11 site and download this rig, I'll tell you right now, when you load it into Maya, the right eyeball here and the right pupil are going to be black. So your character is going to look like it's got a black eye. What you need to do is navigate down the hierarchy and find the eyeball itself, and all you need to do is go up to animation, and not animation, go to modeling. Go into modeling, mesh display, normals, and you select that sphere, the mesh that is basically the eyeball, and you want to reverse the normals on that mesh and everything will look right. Some people, I've seen some postings where they say, well, you just change the lighting to two-sided lighting. Don't do that. That's not what you want to do. It's showing up black because the object itself, the mesh, is inside out. You want to grab that mesh and reverse the normals on it, and that will fix it. So this has been a quick introduction, and like I said, very brief, just to get started with some of the basic concepts of how rigs are made and how they're constructed, and how you use rigs to animate a character. And again, for the 245 students, I want to see you go through and we'll take that Max character, and let's for the first week, let's just build a walk cycle out of that and see how you can do with animating that. So this has been Phil with Phil Effects. Thanks a lot.